The morning mist hung heavy over Windsor Castle as Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell walked through the ornate gates. She had been called to investigate what would become one of the most shocking cases of her career. Behind the grand stone walls and manicured gardens, a story was unfolding that would shake the very foundations of the British monarchy. James Crawford had served as a royal guard for 15 years. His record was spotless, his loyalty unwavering, and his silence absolute. Until today, the 42-year-old former soldier sat across from Detective Mitchell in a small interview room, his hands trembling as he reached for his cup of tea. "I never thought I would be sitting here," James said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't stay quiet anymore. What I witnessed, It changes everything." Detective Mitchell had seen many witnesses over her 20-year career, but something about James Crawford was different. His military bearing remained intact despite the obvious stress. His eyes held the weight of secrets too heavy to carry alone. "Take your time, Mr. Crawford," she said gently. "Tell me what happened on the morning of March 15th. James closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering courage from somewhere deep inside. When he opened them again, his resolve was clear. "I was on early morning duty outside the King's private study. It was around 7 o'clock. Their Majesties often have breakfast together in the adjoining room during the week. I've been part of their security detail for years, so I know their routines well." He paused, taking a sip of tea. His hands were steadier now. "The walls in that part of the castle are thick, but the doors. If you're standing in the right position, you can hear raised voices. At first, I thought it might be the television, but then I heard the Queen's voice, and it was different. Angry in a way I'd never heard before." Detective Mitchell made notes as James spoke. The royal family's private moments were rarely witnessed by outsiders, and even fewer people would dare speak about what they had seen or heard. "What exactly did you hear, Mr. Crawford?" James shifted in his chair. "They were arguing about something to do with charity funds. The king was trying to explain something about proper procedures, but Queen Camilla kept interrupting him. She was saying things like, 'You never support me, and I'm tired of being treated like a child.'" The detective looked up from her notes. "Marital disputes aren't uncommon, Mr. Crawford. What made this different?" "What came next?" James replied grimly. The Queen's voice got louder, more aggressive. She was saying things that Well, they weren't the words you'd expect from royalty. Then I heard a crash like something heavy hitting the floor. James stood up and walked to the small window of the interview room. Outside, normal life continued. People walked by, unaware that the monarchy itself might be in crisis. I knew I should stay at my post, but the crash worried me. What if someone had fallen? What if there was an intruder? My training kicked in and I moved closer to the door. Detective Mitchell sensed this was where the story would take a darker turn. "What did you see, Mr. Crawford?" Through the gap in the door, I could see into the breakfast room. A chair was overturned and there were pieces of broken china on the floor. The king was backed against the wall near the fireplace. His face was red and he looked frightened. The word hung in the air between them. The idea of the King of England looking frightened seemed almost impossible to imagine. Queen Camilla was standing maybe 3 feet away from him, and she was holding something. At first, I couldn't make out what it was. Then I realized it was a heavy crystal paperweight from his desk. She was gripping it like a weapon. James returned to his chair, his face pale. She was shouting at him, calling him weak and saying he was an embarrassment to the crown. The king tried to move away, but she stepped closer. That's when it happened. Detective Mitchell leaned forward. "When what happened, Mr. Crawford?" She threw the paperweight at him. He ducked, and it hit the wall behind him, leaving a mark in the wood paneling. But then she rushed at him with her hands raised. I saw her strike him across the face with her palm, hard enough that the sound echoed through the room. The detective's pen stopped moving. In all her years investigating domestic situations, she had never imagined she would be taking notes about the royal family. "The king just stood there," James continued. "He didn't fight back or even defend himself. He just took it." She hit him again, this time with her fist on his shoulder. He stumbled backward but didn't fall. James rubbed his forehead, clearly struggling with the memory. I've seen combat, Detective Mitchell. I've witnessed terrible things in Afghanistan. But seeing our king being attacked by his own wife, it was something I never expected to witness. What happened next? Queen Camilla seemed to realize what she had done. She stepped back, and for a moment she looked shocked at herself. The king straightened his jacket and said something quietly that I couldn't hear. Then she left the room through another door. James looked directly at the detective. I stayed at my post for the rest of my shift, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. That evening I noticed the king had a small bruise on his left cheek. When other staff asked about it, he said he had walked into a door. Detective Mitchell closed her notebook. Mr. Crawford, why are you coming forward now? This incident happened 3 months ago. Because it's happened again, James said simply. And I believe it's been happening for longer than anyone realizes. Last week I was assigned to night duty, and I saw Queen Camilla pushing the king in a corridor. When she saw me, she immediately pretended to be helping him with his jacket. But I saw what really happened. The detective studied James Crawford's face. Everything about his demeanor suggested he was telling the truth, but the implications of his accusations were staggering. Mr. Crawford, you understand what you're alleging? You're claiming that the Queen Consort has physically assaulted the King of England. James nodded solemnly. I understand completely, Detective. But I swore an oath to protect the royal family, and that includes protecting them from each other when necessary. I can't stand by and watch this continue. Outside the interview room, Detective Mitchell knew that her investigation was about to turn the monarchy upside down. The question was no longer whether these incidents had occurred, but what could be done about them within the complex world of royal protocol and public perception. 3 days after James Crawford's testimony, Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell found herself in uncharted territory. She had requested files on any previous incidents involving the royal couple, but the palace's cooperation was limited. Instead, she decided to speak with other members of the royal household staff. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell had been the royal family's private physician for over a decade. When Detective Mitchell approached her, the doctor's initial response was predictably guarded. Medical confidentiality and royal protocol created walls that were difficult to breach. I cannot discuss specific medical details, Dr. Hartwell said firmly as they sat in her Harley Street office. However, I am concerned about the welfare of all members of the royal family. Detective Mitchell sensed an opening. Dr. Hartwell, I'm not asking for confidential medical information. I'm investigating allegations of assault, and any patterns of injury would be relevant to that investigation. The doctor removed her glasses and cleaned them slowly, clearly weighing her words carefully. Detective, in my years serving the royal family, I have occasionally treated injuries that seemed inconsistent with the explanations provided. Could you be more specific? Dr. Hartwell glanced toward her office door, ensuring their privacy. Over the past 18 months, His Majesty has required treatment for several minor injuries. Bruised ribs, a sprained wrist, facial bruising. Each time the explanation was some form of accident. She paused, choosing her words carefully. In my medical opinion, the pattern and location of these injuries were more consistent with physical altercations than with the accidents described. Detective Mitchell made careful notes. Did you ever question these explanations? I expressed concern privately to His Majesty on one occasion. He became quite defensive and insisted that he was simply becoming clumsier with age. However, Detective, I've treated many patients over the years. I can usually distinguish between accident-related injuries and those caused by other means. The doctor stood and moved to her window, looking out at the busy London street below. There's something else, Detective. Her Majesty Queen Camilla has also been to see me several times recently, but for very different reasons. What kind of reasons? Stress-related symptoms? Elevated blood pressure, insomnia, panic attacks? When I suggested counseling or stress management techniques, she became quite agitated. She insisted that her problems were caused by external pressures and that everyone around her was incompetent. Dr. Hartwell returned to her desk. During one visit, she made several concerning statements about feeling unappreciated and misunderstood. She expressed anger toward what she called people who don't know their place, and spoke about needing to put people in line. Detective Mitchell looked up from her notes. Did she mention the king specifically? Not directly, but the implication was clear. She spoke about people who should be more grateful and those who need to remember who's in charge now. The conversation made me quite uncomfortable. Meanwhile, across London, another conversation was taking place that would prove crucial to the investigation. Margaret Fowler had worked as a housekeeper at Clarence House for 12 years before transferring to Windsor Castle. She had requested to meet with Detective Mitchell after hearing through the staff network that an investigation was underway. They met in a quiet cafe near Victoria Station, far from the royal residences where their conversation might be overheard. I should have spoken up months ago, Margaret said, stirring her coffee nervously. But you don't expect these things to happen with people like that, do you? Margaret was in her 50s, with the practical demeanor of someone who had spent decades managing households. Her observations carried the weight of long experience. I clean the private quarters twice a week, she began. You notice things when you're responsible for keeping everything perfect. Broken items that need replacing, furniture that's been moved, marks on walls that weren't there before. Detective Mitchell encouraged her to continue. What kind of things did you notice? Well, there was the crystal vase that appeared in pieces in the bin one Tuesday morning. Beautiful thing, worth thousands, I'd imagine. When I asked about replacement, I was told it had been accidentally knocked over during a private discussion. Margaret took a sip of her coffee before continuing. Then there were the photographs. His Majesty has several framed pictures on his desk in the study. 3 times in the past few months, I found them face down or with the glass cracked. Each time, I was instructed to have them repaired without asking questions. Did you ever witness any arguments or confrontations directly? Margaret nodded slowly. Once, I was working in the corridor outside the king's study when I heard raised voices. It was clearly their Majesties, but the Queen's voice was. Well, it was frightening. She was using language that I'd never heard from royalty before. What kind of language? Profanity, detective, real angry words. And she was saying things like, "You're pathetic, and I should never have married you." Then I heard what sounded like books hitting the floor. Margaret looked around the cafe nervously before continuing. I knew I shouldn't listen, but I was worried someone might be hurt. Through the keyhole, I could see that the king was picking up papers from the floor while the Queen stood over him, still shouting. Did you report this to anyone? Who would I report it to? The head butler? The private secretary? These people control our jobs, detective, but I did start keeping notes, just in case. Margaret reached into her handbag and pulled out a small notebook. I wrote down dates and what I observed. I thought if things got worse, someone might need to know. Detective Mitchell examined the notebook. Margaret's entries were detailed and dated, showing a pattern of incidents stretching back almost a year. According to your notes, these incidents became more frequent in recent months. Yes, Margaret confirmed, and more intense. Last month, I found what looked like fingernail scratches on the wooden desk in the king's study. When I asked about repair work, I was told to leave the desk alone. The detective closed the notebook. Margaret, would you be willing to provide an official statement about what you've observed? Margaret hesitated. Detective, I need this job. I have a mortgage and responsibilities, but I also can't keep pretending I haven't seen what I've seen. If someone is being hurt, even if they're royalty, that's not right. As Detective Mitchell returned to Scotland Yard that evening, she carried with her a growing file of evidence that painted a disturbing picture. The testimonies of James Crawford, Dr. Hartwell, and Margaret Fowler were beginning to form a pattern that could no longer be ignored. But she also knew that investigating the royal family required delicate handling. Any false step could destroy careers and create constitutional crises. However, the evidence was becoming too substantial to dismiss as mere gossip or misunderstanding. The detective spent that evening reviewing her files and considering her next move. Tomorrow, she would need to speak with more senior officials about how to proceed. The investigation had reached a point where it could no longer remain a quiet inquiry. What she didn't know was that news of the investigation had already begun to leak within palace circles, and powerful people were starting to take notice of Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell's activities. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell arrived at Scotland Yard the next morning to find her supervisor, Chief Inspector David Richards, waiting in her office. His expression was grave, and she immediately knew that word of her investigation had reached higher levels of authority. "Sarah, we need to talk," Richard said, closing the door behind him. "I've received some very interesting phone calls this morning. It seems your investigation has attracted attention from Buckingham Palace." Detective Mitchell sat at her desk, maintaining her professional composure despite the knot forming in her stomach. "What kind of attention, sir?" "The kind that suggests we need to tread very carefully." "I've been contacted by the Cabinet Office, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, and someone who claims to speak for the King's private secretary. They're all asking about the scope and progress of your investigation." Richards moved to the window, looking out at the busy London street below. "Sarah, I need to know exactly what evidence you have and how solid it is. This isn't just about domestic violence anymore. We're dealing with potential constitutional implications." Over the next hour, Detective Mitchell presented her findings systematically. The testimony from James Crawford, the medical observations from Dr. Hartwell, and the documented incidents recorded by Margaret Fowler created a compelling narrative that was difficult to dismiss. "The pattern is clear, sir," she concluded. "We have multiple witnesses describing escalating aggressive behavior, documented injuries consistent with physical assault, and property damage that supports the witness accounts." Chief Inspector Richards reviewed the files carefully. "It's substantial, Sarah, but we're not dealing with an ordinary domestic violence case. Have you considered the broader implications if this becomes public knowledge?" Before Detective Mitchell could respond, her phone rang. The caller identified himself as Sir Anthony Pemberton, the King's private secretary. "Detective Inspector Mitchell, I believe we need to meet urgently. There are matters concerning your current investigation that require immediate attention." The meeting was arranged for that afternoon at a discreet government building near Whitehall. Detective Mitchell and Chief Inspector Richards found themselves in a conference room with Sir Anthony, two representatives from the Cabinet Office, and a woman introduced only as Carolyn from Constitutional Affairs. Sir Anthony was a man in his 60s with the bearing of someone accustomed to managing crises discreetly. He spoke with the measured tone of diplomatic experience. "Detective, we understand you've been conducting inquiries into certain allegations concerning their majesties. While we appreciate your diligence in pursuing any credible reports of criminal activity, we must discuss the unique circumstances surrounding this particular investigation." Carolyn from Constitutional Affairs opened a thick folder. "Detective Mitchell, are you familiar with the legal concept of sovereign immunity and how it applies to the royal family?" Detective Mitchell had anticipated this line of discussion. "I understand that the monarch cannot be prosecuted for criminal offenses while serving as sovereign. However, my understanding is that other members of the royal family do not enjoy complete immunity from prosecution." "That's correct in principle," Carolyn replied. "However, the situation becomes more complex when allegations involve both the sovereign and the consort, particularly when the incidents allegedly occurred within royal residences that have special legal status." Sir Anthony leaned forward. "Detective, I must ask directly, what is your intended course of action with this investigation?" "Sir, if there is credible evidence of criminal assault, regardless of the parties involved, it is my duty to investigate thoroughly and present my findings to the Crown Prosecution Service for review." The room fell silent for several moments. The representatives exchanged glances that suggested private conversations had already taken place about this situation. Chief Inspector Richards spoke for the first time since introductions. "Gentlemen, Detective Mitchell is conducting a legitimate criminal investigation based on witness testimony and supporting evidence. While we understand the sensitive nature of the parties involved, we cannot simply ignore credible allegations of criminal behavior." Carolyn opened another section of her folder. Chief Inspector, we're not asking you to ignore anything. However, we must consider alternative approaches that protect both the integrity of the investigation and the stability of the constitutional monarchy. Sir Anthony nodded. What we're proposing is a carefully managed process that ensures proper investigation while minimizing potential damage to the institution of the monarchy itself. Detective Mitchell felt the weight of political pressure but remained focused on her responsibilities. Sir, with respect, my concern is for the potential victim of these alleged assaults. If King Charles is being subjected to domestic violence, he deserves the same protection under law as any other citizen. Of course, Sir Anthony replied smoothly. But we must also consider His Majesty's own wishes in this matter. Have you attempted to interview the king directly about these allegations? This was the question Detective Mitchell had been dreading. Approaching the king directly would require navigation of complex protocols and could alert Queen Camilla to the investigation if it hadn't happened already. Not yet, sir. Given the sensitive nature of domestic violence cases, I wanted to gather sufficient evidence before approaching the alleged victim. In many cases, victims initially deny abuse due to psychological factors. Carolyn made notes as she spoke. Detective, we propose a controlled approach. A private, informal conversation with His Majesty, facilitated through proper channels to determine his willingness to cooperate with any official investigation. Chief Inspector Richards looked skeptical. And if His Majesty denies the allegations or refuses to cooperate? Do we simply close the investigation despite witness testimony? Not necessarily, Sir Anthony replied. But we would need to carefully consider whether proceeding without the cooperation of the alleged victim serves anyone's best interests. The meeting continued for another hour, with discussions about media management, constitutional precedents, and potential consequences of various courses of action. Detective Mitchell left with the uncomfortable feeling that her investigation was being steered away from standard criminal procedure. That evening, she received an unexpected phone call at home. The voice was male, nervous, and refused to identify himself. Detective Mitchell, I understand you're investigating certain incidents involving the royal family. I have information that might be relevant to your investigation, but I can't discuss it over the phone. Can we meet? Who is this? Detective Mitchell asked. Someone who works closely with the royal household. Someone who has seen things that support what you're investigating. But I need guarantees about my safety and my job before I can say more. They arranged to meet the following evening at a pub in South London, far from the royal palaces and government offices. The caller insisted on several security precautions, including specific seating arrangements and code words. As Detective Mitchell prepared for this clandestine meeting, she realized her investigation had entered a new phase. The official pressure to handle the case delicately was now balanced by the possibility of additional evidence from someone even closer. To the royal couple, what she didn't know was that her phone calls were being monitored, and her meeting with the mysterious caller would not be as private as either of them believed. The investigation was about to take another dramatic turn, one that would bring Detective Mitchell face to face with the darker realities of power, privilege, and the lengths people would go to protect the monarchy's reputation. The Prince of Wales pub in Rotherhithe was exactly the kind of place where Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell hoped to meet her mysterious contact without attracting attention. The dimly lit establishment was filled with local workers finishing their evening meals. Creating perfect cover for a clandestine conversation, she arrived 10 minutes early and chose a corner table that allowed her to observe both the entrance and the bar area. At exactly 8 o'clock, a man in his 30s approached her table. He was well-dressed but nervous, constantly looking over his shoulder. "Detective Mitchell?" he asked quietly. When she nodded, he sat down across from her. "I'm Thomas Blackwood. I work as an equerry for their majesties. What I'm about to tell you could end my career and possibly put me in danger." Thomas ordered a pint with shaking hands before continuing. "I've been with the royal household for 7 years. I coordinate schedules, handle correspondence, and I'm often present during private meetings between the king and queen. Detective Mitchell studied his face carefully. Thomas Blackwood had the refined speech and bearing of someone educated at prestigious institutions, but his current demeanor suggested genuine fear. "Mr. Blackwood, why did you contact me?" "Because I've witnessed things that keep me awake at night. And because I believe James Crawford is telling the truth about what he saw." Thomas took a long drink before continuing. "The incidents Crawford described aren't isolated events. They're part of a pattern that's been getting worse for months." Thomas reached into his jacket and withdrew a small digital recorder. "I need you to understand that what I'm about to play for you was recorded accidentally. I was using this device to take notes during a private meeting when their majesties began arguing in the adjoining room." He placed the recorder on the table between them. "This was recorded 6 weeks ago during a discussion about upcoming royal engagements. The king was questioning some of Queen Camilla's scheduling decisions." Thomas pressed play. The recording quality was poor, but the voices were unmistakably royal. At first, the conversation seemed like a normal disagreement about calendar management. Then Queen Camilla's tone changed dramatically. "Don't you dare question my decisions!" Her voice rose sharply. "I'm tired of your constant criticism and your pathetic attempts to control me." King Charles's voice was quieter, more measured. "Camilla, please, we're simply trying to coordinate our schedules. There's no need for this hostility." "Hostility?" Queen Camilla's voice became venomous. "You want to see hostility? You're a weak, indecisive fool who should be grateful that I'm willing to stand beside you." The recording captured the sound of something heavy hitting a surface, followed by King Charles saying, "Camilla, please." "Not again. Don't tell me what to do." Queen Camilla screamed. The recording picked up sounds of a physical struggle, including what appeared to be objects being thrown and the king's voice saying, "Stop, please, you're hurting me." Thomas stopped the recording. "It goes on for another 3 minutes, but it gets worse." "Much worse." Detective Mitchell sat in stunned silence. The recording provided audio evidence that corroborated everything the other witnesses had described. "Mr. Blackwood, how did you come to possess this recording?" "I was in the outer office taking notes for a memorandum when the argument started. I didn't realize my recorder was still running until later when I reviewed my notes. When I heard what was captured, I didn't know what to do with it." Thomas looked around the pub nervously. "Detective, there's more. I've been keeping a private log of incidents because I was worried about liability issues for the household staff. We're all required to sign confidentiality agreements, but what if we're witnesses to criminal behavior?" He produced a leather journal from his other pocket. "This contains dates, times, and descriptions of 12 separate incidents over the past 8 months, where I either witnessed or heard evidence of physical confrontations between their majesties." Detective Mitchell examined the journal. Thomas's entries were detailed and professionally written, including specific quotes and descriptions of injuries he had observed. "According to your notes, these incidents have been escalating in frequency and severity." "Yes," Thomas confirmed. "The king has become increasingly withdrawn and anxious. He's canceled several public engagements, claiming minor illnesses that don't seem medically justified. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla has become more demanding and volatile with the staff." Thomas flipped to a recent entry in his journal. "Last week, I was present when Queen Camilla berated the king for 20 minutes because he had accepted an invitation to a charity event without consulting her first. She called him incompetent and an embarrassment to the crown in front of 3 other staff members." "How did the king respond to this treatment?" "He just stood there and took it. Afterward, he apologized to the staff for the misunderstanding and asked us not to mention the incident to anyone." "But detective, the look in his eyes—" "He seemed defeated, almost afraid." Thomas closed his journal and leaned forward. "There's something else you need to know. Queen Camilla has been asking questions about staff, loyalty, and confidentiality. Last month, she requested a review of all household employees' background checks and asked specifically about their relationships with media contacts. What do you think prompted these inquiries?" "I believe she suspects that someone might be documenting her behavior." 2 staff members have been transferred to other royal residences without explanation in recent weeks. The official reason was restructuring, but both employees had witnessed concerning incidents. Detective Mitchell realized the investigation had reached a critical point. The audio recording and Thomas's detailed documentation provided substantial evidence of a pattern of domestic abuse. However, she was also aware that pursuing the case would likely destroy Thomas's career and possibly put him at personal risk. Mr. Blackwood, are you prepared to provide an official statement about what you've witnessed? Thomas was quiet for a long moment, staring into his nearly empty pint glass. Detective, I've thought about little else for weeks. I believe in the monarchy as an institution, but I also believe in justice and protecting people from harm. He looked directly at her. If my testimony can help protect the king from further abuse, then yes, I'm prepared to provide an official statement. But I need assurances about my safety and my future employment. I can't guarantee those things. Mr. Blackwood, but I can promise that your testimony will be handled with appropriate discretion and that we'll work with relevant authorities to ensure your protection. As they prepared to leave the pub, Thomas handed Detective Mitchell the recording device and his journal. Detective, there's one more thing. I believe Queen Camilla may have allies within the household who are helping her monitor staff activities. Be very careful about who you trust and where you conduct your interviews. Walking back to her car, Detective Mitchell felt the weight of the evidence she now possessed. The audio recording alone was enough to support criminal charges. But she also knew that using it would create unprecedented legal and constitutional challenges. What she didn't notice was the man in a dark sedan, who had been photographing everyone entering and leaving the pub. Thomas Blackwood's fears about being monitored were more justified than either of them realized. The investigation was about to face its greatest test, as powerful forces within the establishment prepared to take action to protect the monarchy from scandal, regardless of the cost to truth or justice. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell knew she was being followed as she drove through the early morning London traffic. The same dark sedan had been behind her since she left her flat in Clapham, maintaining a careful distance but never falling too far back. The previous evening's meeting with Thomas Blackwood had clearly not gone unnoticed. She arrived at Scotland Yard to find an urgent message waiting on her desk. Chief Inspector Richards wanted to see her immediately, and he wasn't alone. 3 men in expensive suits sat in his office, their briefcases and serious expressions suggesting they weren't ordinary police officials. Detective Mitchell, Richards began formally, these gentlemen are from the security service. They need to discuss your ongoing investigation. The lead official, who identified himself only as Mr. Harrison, spoke with the clipped precision of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Detective, we understand you met with a member of the royal household yesterday evening. We need to discuss the implications of that meeting. Detective Mitchell felt a chill of recognition. The security service meant MI5, and their involvement suggested the investigation had attracted attention at the highest levels of government. I met with a potential witness who contacted me with information relevant to my investigation. That's standard procedure in any criminal case. Nothing about this case is standard, Detective, Mr. Harrison replied. You're dealing with matters that affect national security and the stability of constitutional government. The information you've obtained poses significant risks if mishandled. One of the other officials opened his briefcase and withdrew several photographs. They showed Detective Mitchell and Thomas Blackwood at the Prince of Wales pub, captured from multiple angles with telephoto lenses. Mr. Blackwood has been under surveillance for some time, Mr. Harrison explained. We're aware of his concerns about certain aspects of royal household management. However, his information comes with significant credibility issues. Detective Mitchell studied the photographs, feeling a growing sense of unease. What kind of credibility issues? Mr. Blackwood has a history of personal problems, the second official interjected. Financial difficulties, relationship issues, and a documented tendency toward what his medical records describe as paranoid ideation. Any evidence he provides would be vulnerable to challenge in court. Mr. Harrison leaned forward. Detective, we're not here to obstruct justice. We're here to ensure that justice is pursued through appropriate channels that consider all relevant factors, including national security implications. Chief Inspector Richards, who had remained silent during this exchange, finally spoke. What exactly are you proposing? A coordinated approach, Mr. Harrison replied. The investigation continues, but under enhanced oversight to ensure proper handling of sensitive information. All interviews with royal household staff must be conducted through official channels, and any evidence obtained must be reviewed for security classifications. Detective Mitchell felt the investigation slipping away from normal police procedure into something more politically managed. Sir, domestic violence is a serious crime regardless of who the perpetrator or victim might be. Are you suggesting that criminal behavior should be overlooked because of the parties involved? Not overlooked, Detective. Managed appropriately. Mr. Harrison's tone suggested this wasn't really a request. We have information suggesting that Queen Camilla may also be a victim in this situation rather than solely a perpetrator. This statement caught Detective Mitchell completely off guard. What kind of information? The third official, who had not spoken until now, opened his own briefcase and withdrew a medical file. Dr. Patricia Reynolds, a specialist in psychological disorders, has been consulting with the royal household regarding Queen Camilla's mental health. Her preliminary assessment suggests possible medication-related behavioral changes. He handed Detective Mitchell a summary report. Queen Camilla has been prescribed several medications for various conditions over the past year. Dr. Reynolds believes that interactions between these medications, combined with stress and hormonal changes, may be causing episodes of aggressive behavior that she cannot fully control. Detective Mitchell read through the medical summary. It described symptoms including mood swings, irritability, confusion, and periods of memory loss that could potentially explain the behavior described by witnesses. If this is accurate, she said slowly, it suggests Queen Camilla may need medical intervention rather than criminal prosecution. Exactly, Mr. Harrison agreed, which is why we need to approach this situation with appropriate care. Criminal charges against someone suffering from medication-induced psychological episodes would be both unjust and potentially dangerous to her health. However, Detective Mitchell's investigative instincts were troubled by the convenient timing of this medical information. When did Dr. Reynolds begin treating Queen Camilla? The third official checked his notes. Her first consultation was 3 weeks ago? 3 weeks ago? Detective Mitchell's voice sharpened. My investigation began over a month ago, and the incidents reported by witnesses go back nearly a year. Why is Queen Camilla only receiving psychiatric evaluation now? The room fell silent. Mr. Harrison exchanged glances with his colleagues before responding. The royal family has always been reluctant to seek outside medical assistance for psychological issues. It took considerable time to convince them that professional help was necessary. Detective Mitchell wasn't convinced by this explanation. Sir, I'd like to speak directly with Dr. Reynolds about her assessment. I also want to ensure that King Charles has access to appropriate medical evaluation if he's been suffering physical and psychological abuse. That can be arranged, Mr. Harrison replied. But under specific protocols, Dr. Reynolds is bound by patient confidentiality, and any discussion of royal medical issues must be conducted through proper channels. As the meeting concluded, Detective Mitchell felt frustrated by the increasing complexity of what should have been a straight. The laboratory results arrived on Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell's desk 48 hours later, and they confirmed Thomas Blackwood's worst suspicions. The T-sample contained traces of 3 different psychiatric medications, none of which appeared on Queen Camilla's official medical records provided by Dr. Reynolds. Dr. Amanda Foster, the independent forensic analyst, delivered her report in person. Detective Mitchell, this is one of the most concerning cases I've encountered. The combination of medications found in this sample would cause severe mood swings, memory problems, and aggressive behavior in most people. She opened her file to reveal detailed chemical analysis charts. The levels suggest regular, ongoing administration over several months. Someone with access to Queen Camilla's food and drink, has been systematically drugging her with powerful psychiatric medications. Detective Mitchell studied the report carefully. Dr. Foster, could these medications cause someone to become violent toward their spouse? Absolutely. This particular combination is known to cause what we call paradoxical disinhibition. Essentially, it removes normal behavioral controls and can trigger explosive anger in situations that would normally provoke only mild irritation. The forensic analyst continued. What's most disturbing is that the person administering these medications would need sophisticated knowledge of psychiatric pharmacology. This isn't someone randomly poisoning tea, this is deliberate psychological manipulation. Meanwhile, Detective Mitchell's colleague had retrieved the contents of Thomas Blackwood's storage locker. The additional evidence was overwhelming, audio recordings spanning 6 months. Photographs of injuries on King Charles that he had apparently concealed from official medical examinations, and detailed financial records showing unusual payments to several royal household staff members. Most shocking was a recording from just 2 weeks earlier. On it, Queen Camilla could be heard begging someone to stop giving her those pills that make me crazy. A male voice, which Thomas had identified as belonging to a senior household official, told her that the medication was for her own good and necessary for the stability of the crown. Detective Mitchell realized she was no longer investigating simple domestic violence. She was uncovering a conspiracy to control the queen consort through forced medication, possibly to manipulate her behavior or create grounds for her removal from royal duties. Her phone rang, interrupting her analysis of the evidence. The caller was Chief Inspector Richards, and his voice was tense. "Sarah, we have a problem. Thomas Blackwood has been found dead in his flat. Initial reports suggest suicide, but given your investigation, we need to treat this as potentially suspicious." Detective Mitchell felt the blood drain from her face. "When was he found?" "This morning. Neighbors reported a gas smell from his flat. He was found with the gas cooker on and windows sealed. There was a note apologizing for betraying the trust placed in him and expressing regret for causing harm to the institution he served. Sir, that doesn't sound like the man I spoke with 2 days ago. He was determined to see the truth revealed, not ashamed of his actions." "I know, Sarah. That's why I'm calling. We're treating this as a potential homicide disguised as suicide. But we need to move carefully, very carefully." That afternoon, Detective Mitchell made a decision that would change everything. Instead of continuing to work through official channels that seemed compromised, she contacted investigative journalist Rebecca Walsh from The Guardian. Rebecca had a reputation for fearless reporting on government corruption and had previously broken several stories involving abuse of power at high levels. They met at a secured location arranged by Rebecca's newspaper, with legal representation present to ensure proper handling of the evidence. "Detective Mitchell," Rebecca said after reviewing the materials, "this is the story of the decade. A conspiracy to control the queen consort through forced medication, resulting in domestic violence against the king, followed by the murder of a witness. But publishing this will require extraordinary verification." Rebecca's legal advisor, Marcus Chun, outlined the challenges. "We need independent confirmation of the medication tampering, verification of the audio recordings, and protection for Detective Mitchell as our primary source." "I can provide technical authentication of the recordings," Detective Mitchell replied. "And the forensic analysis of the tea sample is definitive. But I need assurance that this information will be handled responsibly. We'll need to contact Buckingham Palace for official comment before publication," Rebecca explained. "That will likely trigger immediate legal action to prevent publication. But it also gives them an opportunity to respond to the allegations." 3 days later, Rebecca Walsh's story broke on the front page of The Guardian with the headline, "Royal Conspiracy. Queen Camilla allegedly drugged to provoke violence against King Charles." The article detailed the medication tampering, the domestic violence incidents, and Thomas Blackwood's suspicious death. The public reaction was immediate and explosive. Protesters gathered outside Buckingham Palace demanding answers. Parliament called for emergency sessions to address the constitutional crisis. International media descended on London to cover what was being called the biggest royal scandal in modern history. Buckingham Palace's initial response was a brief statement denying all allegations and announcing that Queen Camilla was seeking medical treatment for stress-related health issues. However, within hours, this statement was followed by news that Queen Camilla had been admitted to a private hospital for comprehensive medical evaluation. The most shocking development came when King Charles himself requested a private meeting with Detective Mitchell through his personal attorney. Completely bypassing official palace channels, they met at a secure government facility under tight security. King Charles appeared frail and exhausted, but his resolve was unmistakable. "Detective Mitchell," he began, "I want you to know that I am grateful for your courage in pursuing this investigation. The truth needed to be revealed, regardless of the consequences for the monarchy." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I have been suffering in silence for months, not understanding why my wife had become so volatile and aggressive. The revelation about the medication explains everything." King Charles reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. "I have prepared a formal statement detailing every incident of abuse I can remember, along with my authorization for complete medical examination to document the physical evidence of what I have endured. Your Majesty, do you have any knowledge of who was responsible for administering the medication to Queen Camilla? I suspect it was orchestrated by certain members of my household staff, possibly acting on instructions from individuals who believed that removing Camilla from public duties would benefit the monarchy." The king replied, "However, I want a full investigation to determine the complete scope of this conspiracy." The investigation's conclusion came 6 months later. 7 individuals, including 2 senior royal household officials and 1 member of the security service, were charged with conspiracy, assault, and in the case of Thomas Blackwood's death, murder. Queen Camilla, after months of medical treatment to eliminate the unauthorized medications from her system, provided testimony that helped convict those responsible. The royal family emerged from the scandal fundamentally changed. New protocols were established for medical care. Security clearances were reviewed for all household staff, and an independent oversight committee was created to monitor the welfare of royal family members. King Charles and Queen Camilla, both victims of the conspiracy in different ways, worked together to rebuild their relationship and restore public confidence in the monarchy. Their joint appearances, showing genuine affection and mutual support, gradually helped heal the damage caused by months of orchestrated abuse. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell received commendation for her investigation but requested transfer to a different division, feeling the need to return to cases that didn't involve constitutional crises. However, her work on the royal conspiracy case established new protocols for investigating domestic violence cases involving high-profile individuals and demonstrated that justice must apply equally to all citizens. Regardless of their position in society, the case became a landmark in British legal history, proving that the rule of law extends even to the highest levels of the constitutional monarchy, and that courage in pursuing truth can triumph over the most powerful forces of institutional protection.